Let's talk about accounting for production drift in this topic. We've talked briefly about drift in previous modules, but let's take a minute and examine this in more detail. Production drift is when our live database changes in a way that isn't tracked or expected or initiated in development. Usually it's because somebody in operations, some DBA, needs to correct an issue, improve performance, or make some other change directly to the production system. Often they're under pressure to do so, and so they have to just make that change. When this happens, we say that our production database has drifted from a known state. And if we don't have any mechanism that tracks or deals with this drift, then we'll find our software development process gets out of control and we start to have instability in how we're deploying software. Database changes often depend on previous changes, so they depend on an expected state, and so we need to ensure that development accurately reflects production. Otherwise, we'll have potential issues. One of the first things we have to do in DevOps is ensure that we understand what we have in production and ensure development reflects that, and then we can start to make changes. Now, when we release software, we often look at the target database to build our release package. Now, this works fine for this package, but what if each target is different, or what if the target changes? How confident are we that our development changes are going to work on any target database if it's not what we expect? Many of the issues with deploying database changes come from this exact situation. The target database has drifted or diverged too far from development or from the previous deployment, and our code doesn't work. One of the other problems is that we'll make changes in a production system, and we aren't aware of what the differences are between different production databases. I may have 2 or 3 databases there, and if I change for one client, not for another one, I'm not sure that the system will actually deploy code correctly. The other problem is I may look at my target and build a perfectly valid package that I'm sure will deploy, and then before I can perform that deployment, somebody in the production system, somebody in operations will actually make a change. We can't prevent this. We can't prevent database drift at all. If my system has misspelled United States as a country lookup, then our customers, our management will be upset, and I can't wait for other changes to flow through the development system in a new release and then deploy that. I may have to just fix that in production. This is especially true if I don't have a hotfix branch of development that I can actually perform that work on. And we'll talk about branches later in this course. But instead, what I'll actually have to do is run that update query on production and solve that issue and correct that spelling. Now, ideally, my next step in a DevOps world is to ensure that that change is made in development. I want to feed it back to development and then have it go through our system. If we have a list of countries of reference data, I don't want my next deployment package to look at my table and realize that the correct spelling of the United States is incorrect because in development it's spelled incorrectly. Too often our production drift changes aren't actually fed back to development. And that's a problem in DevOps. We want to make sure we're providing feedback. We're shifting left as much as possible. We want to learn from our mistakes or learn from what doesn't work well. We want to incorporate those back into our process. This is one of those areas of collaboration where operations staff have to learn to get that information back to development, ensure that they understand what changes are being made so that we can consistently deploy to all environments. Even if this is just a hotfix on production, it has to be made in development. Ideally, your DevOps release process is going to look for drifts. It's going to check the state of the system when it's building that release package, and then before it actually performs that deployment, since we don't know how long that delay could be, we want to ensure that nothing has changed, and we want to recheck the target to be sure that it's exactly in the state we expect. And if there are changes, we want to flag them and perhaps pause the development. Let somebody examine the scripts, try to make their own determination if there's going to be any problems making the deployment. In the absence of any automatic checks, anytime drift is detected in production, it's really useful for somebody to evaluate whether or not these changes are going to be a problem in the future. Somebody in operations or DBA or even a developer should look at the drift, log it, make it visible for everybody, and then decide if it's going to affect any future development items. We'll look at a demo here in a bit where we'll talk about how we can detect drift and how we can worry about dealing with it when we deploy our software.